3 underrated tanks of World War II. Number 3. The T-26 light tank, Soviet Union. It came into service in 1931. It was a light tank with a hefty 45mm gun, but lightly armored, 15 to 20mm, which was later upgraded with additional armor. A total of 11,000 tanks of different models were built. It saw service in the Spanish Civil War, where it outperformed all other tanks. By 1939-40 it started to show its age. And during the Winter War with Finland, a large number of tanks were destroyed or captured, mostly from a lack of understanding how to use it, more than the deficiency of the tank itself. As Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, they were faced mostly with T-26 tanks and the BT series of tanks. This tank was not bad even then. It was slightly better than the Panzer II, and it was comparable to the Panzerkampfwagen 38T, the Czech version of a tank that the Germans used. It had slightly less armor, but a good gun in comparison. This was not a main battle tank like the Panzer III, so against the Panzer III it had little effect. It was too lightly armored. But as a light tank it was good in design. In more capable hands, with a better understanding on tank tactics, it could have made a big impression in 1941. For example, some 2,000 of the 3,500 German tanks that took part in Operation Barbarossa had about the same technical specifications as the T-26. The problem was it was a lack of spare parts. Other vehicles had to be cannibalized to keep the rest going. It had limited radio communication, and of course Luftwaffe had air superiority. But mostly it was a bad tactical understanding of how to use tanks, which made it look worse than it actually was. So this is why I think that the T-26 deserves the third spot. Number 2. Somua S-35 France. A tank that was developed in 1935, and some 440 were built before France fell to Germany in 1940. The tank had a 3-man crew with good armor for the beginning of the war, a staggering 47mm at the front. The gun was a 47mm and it had a top off-road speed of 32 km per hour. The biggest drawback was the one-man turret, where the commander not only had to command but also fire the main gun and machine gun, which was too much to do for one person. Even so, the tank, when used correctly, would surprise the Germans during 1940, and it was a hard tank for them to knock out. This could be seen at the Battle of Hanut, the biggest tank clash in World War II up to that point. The one-man turret was a drawback, but not so much that it did not create a formidable opponent to the German counterpart. The Germans were better tactically and had better communication between its tanks, which meant that local French successes remained local successes. Captured tanks were used by the Germans, and even though they were no real match for the T-34, for example, they still saw some service up until 1944, when it was totally obsolete. But in 1940, I would say it was among the best tanks in the world in its class, even though it had a one-man turret. So this is why it gets the second spot. Number 1. 7TP light tank, Poland. Development started in the early 30s. From the start with a twin turret design that was later scrapped for a better one turret. It had a 37mm Bofors gun and a crew of 3. As it was a light tank, the armor was somewhat lacking, but it was on par with the Panzer I and Panzer II for sure, and it had a very capable gun for its time. It was not a bad tank for 1939. Poland managed to knock out German tanks with it, but again, better German tactics, air superiority, lack of fuel and spare parts, meant that this tank never became a war-winning weapon in itself. In total, 149 tanks were built, and some examples captured by the Germans would see service until 1944. So, an OK light tank, why is this on the first spot? Well, it had something that all later tanks would have, and that was the Grundlash rotary periscope. A periscope that made it possible to see 360 degrees. This periscope would be used in Axis tanks, Soviet T-34, the UK tanks and the US tanks. So it was a tank design that was an OK light tank, but it had a cutting-edge periscope design that would influence most other tanks for a long time. So this is why it has the first spot. If you did like this video, give me a like and a subscribe, and if you so want, leave a comment and I will get back.